Entergy is proud to support programming on LPB and greener practices that preserve Louisiana.
The goal of our environmental and sustainability initiatives really is to ensure that our kids and future generations can be left with a cleaner planet.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
We've still got a long way to go in the science.
Weather experts say for all the advances made in forecasting, there's still a lot that needs to be learned.
We're right in the teeth of it.
A sobering reminder about where we are in the hurricane season calendar.
The good news is, I think our infrastructure is better.
The general speaks on the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
And we can't just say, okay, we've built that levee and we're done with it.
A look at Hurricane Katrina past, present, and future. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Williams.
And I'm Andre Morrow. Our top story on this week's edition of SWI is Hurricane Laura and how it became a storm of record in our state's painful hurricane history. Laura's name now listed among the worst ever. But before we get to our extensive coverage of Laura's devastation, here's a look at our latest statewide coronavirus numbers.
More than 146,000 coronavirus cases are being reported, and more than 4,700 people have died. 900 remain hospitalized. Now to the strongest hurricane to hit Louisiana since 1856. It came ashore near Cameron with near Category 5 winds. It was being forecast to bring an unsurvivable 20-foot storm surge.
You know, names like Audrey and Rita are the benchmarks for hurricanes in southwest Louisiana and Lake Charles. And now there's Laura. Tonight, 700,000 people in the region remain without power. Some of Lake Charles is barely recognizable, but Governor John Bel Edwards says there's a reason to be thankful it wasn't worse.
It is clear that we did not sustain and suffer the absolute catastrophic damage that we thought was likely based on the forecast we had last night.
Governor John Bel Edwards briefed media Thursday about what Hurricane Laura left behind, then went to see the destruction himself from the air. He and other state leaders observed it flying over Cameron, Calcasieu, and Vermilion parishes. Laura struck Louisiana as one of the most powerful storms in U.S. history, smashing what was in its path and killing at least 6 people, including a 14-year-old girl and a 68-year-old man. Its Cat 4 winds were as advertised, tearing apart homes and businesses. They shattered many of the prominent buildings and casinos in downtown Lake Charles. There's major damage and windows blown out at the Capital One Bank Tower. Area casinos also had windows blown out, and one lost part of its roof. The storm's wrath sent a riverboat casino crashing into the I-10 bridge, forcing Interstate 10 to close while inspections took place.
We have thousands and thousands of our fellow citizens whose lives are upside down because their businesses and or their homes have been damaged. And we have lots of challenges around the state, to say the least, with a variety of things, whether it's electrical power, water service, you name it. And so we have a lot of work to do.
Authorities say the damage, though, could have been much worse. If the storm had made landfall a few miles west, it might have washed up far more water. Laura also struck a swampy wildlife refuge area that is sparsely populated. It struck far enough east to spare the bulk of the Gulf Coast's chemical and oil facilities at the Louisiana-Texas state line. It caused a large chemical leak and fire at a chlorine production plant just west of Lake Charles. It sent a billowing plume of smoke for miles, and emergency alert for people to take shelter from chlorine gas and other emissions. Hurricane-weary Cameron on the coast got the first punch from Laura, which had erupted in just 24 hours from an 85-mile-an-hour Cat 1 to a monster Cat 4, with top winds of 150 miles per hour. After a crushing blow to Lake Charles, the storm delivered hurricane-force winds to Alexandria, Natchitoches, and Shreveport as it moved north and out of the state. The governor also did a flyover of central and north Louisiana today to inspect damage. The main problems were caused by downed trees and also power lines.
All of these ills that we have here can be solved and will be solved once the electricity comes back on. And that's going to happen in the next couple of days. I'm very, very confident. It'll be much longer than that in southwest Louisiana.
And now let's take a look at other stories making headlines around the state. The state has made strides in battling its second coronavirus surge, but not enough to change the orders of the governor. The mandate of wearing a mask and the closure of bars will remain in place for at least another 2 weeks. The governor signed a new proclamation this week. The measures are seen as proven methods of slowing the spread of the virus. Plans are moving forward for a $90 million sawmill project that could bring nearly 100 jobs to St. Helena Parish. State economic development leaders say the new mill is expected to employ 95 full-time workers by 2022 and create 120 construction jobs at the site near Greensburg. The Advocate newspaper reports Florida Parish's Forest Products filed an economic incentive agreement with the state in early August. It includes a request that would exempt the mill from paying property taxes for up to its first 10 years. About 50 protesters held a sit-in outside of Lafayette City Hall Monday after being told they couldn't file complaints about the way officials handled the deadly shooting of a black man. The Friday death of 31-year-old Trayford Pellerin has heightened tensions between protesters and local leaders in the consolidated city parish of Lafayette. A Lafayette police spokesperson says all of the officers involved are on administrative leave. The week's threat of hurricanes won't stop $300 checks from going out to about 400,000 people in the state left unemployed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The governor says he expected the checks to be in the mail by the end of the week. Jobless workers would get the weekly payments retroactive to August 1st. The development of Laura capped more than a week of hurricane anxiety in the state. Before Laura even became a hurricane, there was Hurricane Marco, remember? And warnings of these two storms hitting us in the same week.
For Louisiana, certainly, had Marco maintained hurricane intensity, we would be looking at an unprecedented event, no doubt about it.
Meteorologist Jay Grymes at WAFB-TV in Baton Rouge considered what almost was. Two hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico hitting the state just days apart.
A hurricane hitting the southeastern coast, and within 48 hours, a second more powerful hurricane hitting the southwestern coast. I mean, how would we measure that? We'd be responding to the rescues in the southeastern parishes while we watch what is going to be utter devastation unfold in the southwestern parishes.
Grymes and state climatologist Barry Keim both made a point about what the week exposed in terms of forecasting hurricanes. That for all the advances in predicting weather and the slick computer-generated graphics used in presentations, we learned that forecasting still often misses the mark.
We've still got a long way to go in the science. The literal collapse of Marco, and in fact, all of the storm energy ending up in the Florida Panhandle in Alabama and not coming here, and all of that evolving in about a 12 to 24-hour period is a reminder that we're decades away from really being able to know what these systems are going to do.
Our forecasting, I mean, yeah, it's inching along and it's improving, but we really haven't had any incredible, significant breakthroughs in weather forecasting in many decades.
This hurricane season is playing out the way it was predicted to be, extremely active. It's the most active season since the record-setting 2005, when Hurricanes Katrina and Rita left permanent scars on the state. Because we've already had so many named storms, 2020 is on pace to surpass 2005, and it's a worry that we're still just in August.
Keep in mind, we're in the real teeth of the hurricane season, which runs from about, I'd say, mid-August to the first week of October. So we're really just kind of getting going in that sort of that high octane window when we tend to see the most frequent and the most powerful of storms. We're so far ahead of schedule this season. It's just just unbelievable. We've already had 13 named storms, and we're not even to the midpoint in the season. The midpoint occurs around September the 10th. That's where we reach about the halfway point. It's kind of go downhill sailing from there. But, an average season has 12 storms. We've already had 13, and we're not even to that midpoint yet. And really, just in the teeth of the season, it doesn't bode well for the next 5 or 6 weeks, let's say.
If we talk about things like where we are in the alphabet and how early each of these storms came, yeah, we've been setting record after record after record by 7 to 10 days. But your point is maybe the most important one, is that we've been dealing with relatively weaker storms up until now. So there's a tool that meteorologists and tropical forecasters use called the ACE, the ACE, the accumulated cyclone energy. And when we compare the accumulated cyclone energy at the end of August for 05 to this year, even with Laura out there, 05 was clearly a much more destructive season up till now. Right. But we're certainly on pace to end up back in the Greek alphabet once again.
And it's still August.
Exactly. And it's still August. And, even though Marco is essentially a dud, it counts. Laura will be the third named system to hit the Bayou State, and it's not September yet.
Just the mention of the name Katrina brings flooding back. Lots of bad memories. More than 1,200 people killed, more than $125 billion in damage in and around New Orleans. But 15 years later, what have we learned, and could we survive another Katrina? We talked to two experts. Our first conversation is with General Russel Honoré. He is credited with helping put New Orleans back together after the devastating aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And now, as an expert in all things Katrina, he helps us revisit the good, the bad, and unfinished 15 years later.
The good news is, I think our infrastructure is better. The good news is, I think, the fact that our National Guard Brigade is not in Iraq the way it was during Katrina. I think the state and the local governments are better prepared. What worries me, I'm not sure if the people are as prepared as the government is.
General Russel Honoré, a retired veteran commander in the U.S. Army with several deployments overseas, gained international acclaim back in 2005 at the helm of Joint Task Force Katrina.
Mother Nature can break anything built by man. There's some people argue that, well, if the levees were stronger, the water wouldn't have gotten into the city. Well, the levees were rebuilt for a Category 3 100-year storm. What happened when we get a Category 4 storm, which means the levees can be over top, or a barge that's left untied in the Mississippi River can happen, as it did in the Ninth Ward, and break the barrier and cause the Ninth Ward to flood. So what happened in Katrina? We got overmatched. Mother Nature beat us. The water came over the wall, and it flooded the city. Could the levees been stronger? Yes, but there's a limit. You build levees like you build fences. You put up a 10-foot levee, and Mother Nature bring a 12-foot storm.
General Honoré says the Louisiana coast is more vulnerable in large part because natural barriers of protection have begun disappearing.
We don't have the wetlands like we used to have. Our wetlands have deteriorated from climate change and from pollution. Climate change in that the rising sea level is coming in, which push more salt water into our wetlands that come in through the exploration canals that were left, and it's deteriorated our wetlands.
And he says what happened here took decades.
That being said, that's happened over the last 70 years. And now there are many efforts by the state of Louisiana and others to try and put more soil into the wetlands. But we're fighting an uphill battle because we lost that war 40 years ago when we left those canals open. And we're not closing the canals, which means our wetland is not what it was when Hurricane Andrew came through or when Betsy came through. We have less wetlands, so the hurricanes come to the city of New Orleans at a higher strength, or they make it to Baton Rouge as Gustav did as a higher strength, or Rita made it into Cameron Parish because our wetlands have been destroyed.
General Honoré is optimistic with the progress made since one of the costliest storms in history.
The effort that's been made by the government, the state and the federal government, $114 billion protection system around New Orleans that points to the south was a good effort. But we've got to remember, even that can be defeated by Mother Nature.
Here we are now, we're better prepared. But again, that goes back to the question, if another situation like Katrina comes, after $114 billion in repairs, retrofitting, preparation, can we survive?
Oh, I think we can survive. But this is different. We got 2 hurricanes today, or effects of 2, one tropical storm and a potential hurricane. We got a COVID pandemic going on. And then on any given night, in our 2 largest cities, we're fooling around with gun violence. And we got the effects of pollution in places like St. John's and St. James Parish. So we got a continuing level of friction that impact our quality of life and people get worried about. And then we get the hurricanes and the pandemic. On top of that, that's closed our economy down. Much of our people are not working. Yeah, we can survive. We know when to start moving people based on the predictions, but we're not going to get everybody out. And if the storm comes directly toward New Orleans, we're going to lose people.
Our thanks, as always, to General Honoré. On this week leading up to the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a panel of experts had hoped to have a virtual discussion marking the loss of more than 1,200 souls to Katrina and its aftermath. But the event was postponed as Tropical Storm Marco and Hurricane Laura bounded into the Gulf of Mexico. We spoke with Charles Allen of the National Audubon Society about the future of coastal Louisiana.
As you look back, what have we learned since that hurricane, that devastating hurricane 15 years ago?
Well, one thing that comes to my mind, and of course, I'm sure you've heard us talk a lot about this in the various conversations, be it scientific, civic, you name it. I think we as a people in South Louisiana, we've definitely come to appreciate the importance of what I'm gonna call our natural buffer systems that protect us from storm surge, okay? Wetlands and all the other intricacies within the ecosystem that contribute to that natural system, okay? I say all the time that we can't completely do away with the levees and the flood walls, the physical structures, but we need the natural structures as well. And so as I'm sure you've experienced, since Katrina, you've got a population here that's a lot more aware of that. And so that has really helped to contribute to a lot more active advocacy, okay, around making certain that our government and governmental agencies put the necessary resources to that body of work.
Charles Allen is the Community Engagement Officer for the National Audubon Society, a nonprofit organization that, along with focusing on bird life and habitats, also advocates for ecosystem restoration. He was a scheduled panelist for a virtual event to discuss the past, present, and future of Hurricane Katrina that was postponed because of the dangerous storms now in the Gulf. He says as we mark the 15th anniversary of the death and destruction caused by Hurricane Katrina, we also have to remember that the corrective infrastructure built after the storms is getting older.
All of those systems that we've put in place 15 years and 12 years ago and so forth, you got to maintain those systems ever so often. You got to further invest in them. We got to always remind ourselves, we can't just take our foot off the pedal, and we can't just say, okay, we built that levee and we're done with it. No. Because the elements and gravity and people continue to act on things. And so we got to go back and enhance what we've built.
What is the future of Louisiana's coastal communities?
One of the key ingredients to restoring our environment down here is this thing called sediment, and the sediment that comes from the river. One of the things that I have come to appreciate, and I love studying the history of our geography and topography, is how over the many, many thousands of years that the river flowed down here, it was the river that brought all of that rich sediment and silt and mud that built up this area. Well, we've got to do all that we can to help that sediment contained in that river get to those areas where it's really needed. There are major projects focused on how do we get that rich, you know, you might say lifeblood sediment back into those eroding wetland areas. And so a considerable portion of the state's restoration efforts and coastal master plan is focused on that, okay? And as you heard me say earlier, there's gonna always be, Natasha, this need to do this kind of work. There's gonna always be this need, because you know, every year there's a hurricane season that will send a storm or two or more. And the storm can of course chop through and undo the work that took place just a few months ago.
And the most important thing that everyone needs to remember as we look back at the past storms and forward as a potential hurricane threatens our area, have a plan and execute it.
Here's something that Charles Allen and his family is going to always try to do in the event of any storm that comes our way that's Category 3 or stronger. And again, we're reminded of this by the various, what I'm gonna call civil defense officials, is get the hell out of Dodge. Because there's always the possibility that a cousin of Katrina can come along, and depending on how she shifts and depending on how much water she brings, you know, all of those factors that come into play, there could be certain overtopping in certain areas, you know. As we know, with every system, there's going to be some weak point, and water's going to flow to wherever the weak point is, you know. So my point is, I think we can sustain it, but trust me, I encourage all people, take the necessary precautions, and when the word gets out to evacuate, do it.
The virtual event to discuss Hurricane Katrina, the 15th anniversary, past, present, and future, is being rescheduled. We'll let you know when organizers announce a new date and time.
There was the usual massive evacuation of oil rigs and workers ahead of the storms. The disruption from hurricanes can attack the entire energy infrastructure. That's what some industry leaders say. But what about in a year when the demand for oil has dropped? I talked with David Dismukes, Executive Director of LSU's Center for Energy Studies.
Normally in a normal summer for an outage of this duration, you might see some impacts, and obviously you'll prices bid up, and prices are a little bit up right now because there's always the anticipation, the expected damages that could arise in all of this. This year's a little different because of what you can imagine. Demand is pretty far down. So it is rebuilding. We're certainly nowhere near where we were pre-COVID levels. Inventories are real high around, not only in the United States, but around the world. So I think right now there's a discounting of the significance that the storm is going to have to overall supplies and prices. And as we look kind of and continue to assess as the information starts to come in after this, it seems to be probably a pretty good position to be in. Also in years past, the Gulf has often been the single largest workforce for the energy complex around the United States. You go back to, for instance, Katrina and Rita, we were producing in the Gulf of Mexico probably about a quarter of our natural gas supplies. I think almost as much as a third of our crude oil supplies at that time. This was before the unconventional shale revolution, right? And nowadays we've got such a diversity of resources around the United States that if this had a catastrophic impact in the Gulf, there are so many wells and so many resources that are waiting and have the ability to kind of fill in for that, that I think it would dampen any high price problems that we might have or supply interruption problems that we might have.
You mentioned this year is different anyway because of the COVID situation and the great reduction in the demand. How is the industry coping with that, and what's being done to manage it?
Well, you know, right now it's a little bit out of industry's hands. The resiliency of the industry is going to be determined by how they can kind of hang in there as more and more economies start to come back online. A lot of positive news over the last month coming from Asia and the Asian parts of the world, where you're starting to see really significant growth in those areas. Economic activity is up, import activity and export activity is up, trade is up in those areas. They're starting to come around a little bit quicker than you see in the Western economies, the United States, Japan, Western Europe, for instance. But again, we're starting to see strength build up both here and in other places abroad. So it's just going to take some time. There's a lot of inventory out there that got built up throughout the spring and into the, let's say, middle part of the summer when people started to earnestly re-enter into the economy. So we've still got a long way to go.
Hey, great. It's good to talk to you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Anytime you need anything, give me a holler.
And everyone, that's our show for this week. LPB wants to make sure Louisiana's voices are heard in the National PBS American Portrait Storytelling Project.
Choose a topic at pbs.org/American Portrait, then submit a video, photo, or simply your thoughts. Share your story today.
For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow.
And I'm Natasha Williams. Thanks for watching.
Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Entergy is proud to support programming on LPB and greener practices that preserve Louisiana.
The goal of our environmental and sustainability initiatives really is to ensure that our kids and future generations can be left with a cleaner planet.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.